Okay, so it's been a little while since I was on the 14th cannon, and today we are back and we're going to be talking about transfers because there's been a lot of news this past week. As expected, I think as the window goes on and less gets done, the more noise there's going to be surrounding Arsenal Football Club, and that's exactly the case. But before we do that, I'm going to turn my light on. Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about defensive additions, outgoings, and also incomings in the forward line. So yeah, let's get straight on with it, and let's start with Victor Osimhen. Victor Osimhen. This is this is a really random one. Apparently, Victor Osimhen is rumored with a move to Arsenal, according to some sources. And this comes in sort of a deal that discusses certain players going the other way from Arsenal to Galatasaray. And in Galatasaray's sort of interest in those players, a deal for Victor Osimhen has been discussed by Arsenal. And yeah, look, I think Osimhen's a good player, but in what world, in what squad can you have Osimhen, Gyökeres, and Havertz all at the club, all wanting to start regularly for Arsenal? I just don't see how it works. Having three good number nines, all in their own ways. I think they're all brilliant number nines in their own ways. How do you keep all of those guys happy if they all want to be playing regularly? If you have a look at Osimhen's goal return, I think his output, his numbers are exceptional. I think Gyökeres as well. He's proved that he can score goals as he scored 21 last year. And then Havertz, he came in clutch during the big moments. You think of the winner against Burnley, um, albeit he scored at the Etihad, which ultimately meant nothing, but he still popped up at the right place at the right time, pressing Donnarumma, and then also in the Champions League final as well. So I think all three of those guys are good. But if Osimhen does come in, could that be Gyökeres or Havertz potentially leaving? I don't know. I think Osimhen would potentially be an would he be an upgrade? I think he would probably be an upgrade. I just think that although he offers goals, which is what we've got in Gyökeres, I do still see differences as players. I think Osimhen, I just think that he's a different type of striker to Gyökeres, but both are tall, both will score goals. So yeah, look, let me know what you guys think about Osimhen in the comments section. But let's talk about defensive additions. Let's talk about defensive additions. Ezri Konsa. This is a name that will not leave Arsenal in terms of like there's lots of noise around this guy potentially making a move to Arsenal, and that noise is not going away. Now, apparently, Arsenal are still quite significantly under Aston Villa's valuation for Ezri Konsa, as they want about 60 million, but Arsenal aren't willing to pay that. There's been talks of 30 million, there's been talks of 40 million, and I think this is putting Arsenal off when it comes to the interest of Ezri Konsa, and could potentially mean that a deal might not be struck for the England international. Now, it's very clear to see that Arsenal want a centre back who can cover at right back. Obviously, William Saliba, devastatingly, is going to be out for a little while. Um, I think he's opting not to have surgery, which is brave, but it means that he might not be 100% for a little while. So we're going to need cover at centre back at the moment, which I think we have in the squad already. And then we're also going to need cover at right back for when Saliba is back. Maybe potentially the club plan to move on a player like Ben White, which, look, I wouldn't sell Ben White this summer, especially considering the stage of the window that we're at. And yeah, It's an interesting one, Ezri Konsa. Now, as I say, I don't think Arsenal need to buy another centre back, right back sort of hybrid. We've got Mosquera who can do the job as a centre back and a right back. We've also got Ben White who can do the job, and then probably most notably Julian Timber as well. So I do think the club should look internally to see if there's any short-term solutions to the Saliba injury, because it's clear to see that Arsenal want another defender, but do we really need one, especially with Salmon, who's another one who can play centre back and right back? Do we really need another one of those guys? And what does that say to a player like Maurice Salmon? Could that potentially limit minutes and opportunities for him? And also, I do think if we want to bring in another defender, we've got the players who can cover a centre back. Ben White's brilliant. Timber is amazing. Mosquera, young, promising. Salmon as well. I think we've got the player. Calafiori Hincapié could even do the job. I do think if we want to bring in another defender, we should go out for an all and out and out right back, a proper right back who can defend and also put in a shift when it comes to going forward as well. Because Konza, although he's a good defender, I'm not 100% certain by that statement. Although I don't think he is potentially as comfortable in the final third as say a Ben White or a Julian Timber. Someone who can overlap, someone who can underlap, someone who can do all the things that a right back is expected to do. And then you've got Mosquera as well, who I think in the final third doesn't look comfortable. I think he is much more of a centre back, Mosquera, as opposed to a right back. Um, but yeah, do Arsenal risk it with that? And as I say, the price that Aston Villa want, Arsenal aren't willing to meet that. So that has sparked an interest today in João Quansah. Jarell Quansah, formerly of Liverpool, currently plays for Bayer Leverkusen. Apparently, Arsenal are interested in a deal. Sky Sports broke the news this morning, and it was then quickly followed up by sources such as David Ornstein and also Fabrizio Romano. A deal that would be cheaper than Ezri Konsa and Quansah, honestly. During the World Cup, those two names did annoy me a little bit because they're just so similar. Is it Konsa? Is it Quansah? Who's the commentator talking about? Honestly, who's playing at right back? Who's playing at centre back? Because they played next to each other, obviously. But this is a player that would be cheaper than Konsa, only by like 10, 15 million, though, I think. I still think this guy would be a little bit pricey. Um, he is a homegrown player, came through at Liverpool, and yeah, I mean, everywhere this guy's been, he's had trust. He's been given trust by Jurgen Klopp when he was coming through as a young player at Liverpool. He had trust from Arne Slot as he played quite a lot of minutes when Liverpool won the title. He's played a lot. He's been a regular starter for Bayer Leverkusen, and then also from Thomas Tuchel as well. You know, he got selected to the England squad over players such as Harry Maguire, for example, and players like that who you feel as if are more established England internationals. So I do think this guy's had trust. So there's clearly a player in there. And look, I think he's a good defender. I don't think he's particularly amazing. And as I say, do we want a centre back stroke right back hybrid who look, is this guy actually much better than Christian Mosquera? Maybe he's got more experience, but I think I'd rather just stick with Mosquera and go with into the season like that. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Let me know in the comments what you make of the defensive situation. Now let's talk about some attackers again. There's three attackers that we're going to talk about. This guy is the first one. Kenan Yildiz. Obviously, Arsenal have missed out on a potential deal for Vinicius Junior. And I'm going to talk through some potential alternatives that Arsenal may look at. And this is the first one, Kenan Yildiz, who I think would cost a lot of money, having just signed a new contract at Juventus. However, I really like this player. I think that this guy, his stocks are really high at the moment. I think, he's definitely an upgrade, I feel, on someone like Martinelli, who we'll talk about later on. And yeah, this would really excite me. I think this deal would really excite me. Um, ag- Again, I do feel as if we're only going to sign another left winger if Martinelli departs. So yeah. However, Yildiz is a name that I've spoken about a lot on this channel, so I'm not going to deep dive into the player. I'm not going to give him like very deep insight and analysis into this guy because we've done it before on the channel if you want to check it out after this one. But yeah, I really like this player. I think, he's going to go on and do superb things. He's been a regular starter now at Juventus for 2 years. So yeah, look, I think I'd be extremely happy with this signing if it does happen. However, it would probably cost more than £100 million, which is the only thing that I think Arsenal should take into consideration here. However, I think we desperately need something on that left hand side, so I wouldn't mind overpaying a little bit if it meant bringing in a quality option such as Yildiz. Another player that apparently Arsenal hold an interest in is Iliman Ndiaye from Everton, who is a player that, such as Yildiz, really excites me. I don't think he cost as much as Yildiz either. I think this guy is by far Everton's best player as well. Um, his goal output, his assists. Obviously, Everton brought in Jack Grealish last year, which kind of took up that right wing spot for the first 6 months of the season. But even with that, this guy, I think, outperformed Jack Grealish. I think he was Everton's best player last year. He got shifted over to the right from the left, and he still put in shifts. So he's versatile. He can cover on both sides, which I think is important, especially for an Arteta profile, because we've seen quite a lot when Saka's been unavailable. Trossard shift over to the right, Martinelli shift over to the right. Trossard and Martinelli being on the pitch at the same time, pretty much. So I do think that this would be a great addition. Yeah, I do think this would be a great addition for Arsenal and one that Arteta would like. And I'm certainly not against it either. I think if Ndiaye came in, such as Yildiz, I'd be very excited about that signing. Um, Up next, we've got Julian Alvarez. Um, I just don't think you can rule this name out when it comes to Arsenal moves. I think this guy, yeah, I don't think he's going to get his move to Real Madrid or Barcelona. I don't think Atletico want to sell internally to La Liga against potential opponents this season. So I do think that Arsenal are probably his best option after that. Um, and I think we'd be able to afford the deal. He can cover through the middle, he can cover as a 10, as a second striker, as a winger. But yeah, I just don't feel as if he was the out and out winger signing, I'd be on board with that. I think this guy's better through the middle. Now, could this potentially spark an interest for Victor Gyökeres going the other way to Atletico Madrid and he comes in as a new number 9? I don't know. But yeah, but I think this is a very good player. Julian Alvarez, undeniably world class. He's won trophies everywhere he's been. He's scored a load of goals everywhere. So I think this guy would be a brilliant addition to Arsenal. But I just don't think that he's an out and out winger, which I think is what Arsenal are more desperate for. I just think Arsenal are more desperate for that at the moment. So for me, Julian Alvarez, world class player, but I don't think he is 100% what Arsenal need right now. Anyway, let's talk about some outgoings. First one being Reiss Nelson. Now, lots of conflicting reports around Reiss Nelson. Some people saying he's going out on loan to West Ham. Some people saying that the deal's called off. Some people are saying it's a permanent deal. So some of the reports that I've read say that he is going to West Ham, and a deal could be struck at around £3 million, which, yeah, it's not a lot, but he's out of contract in 12 months. Yeah, I can kind of see why West Ham would want him as like an Adama Traore replacement. Obviously, they lost Traore. Um, he signed a 6 month deal there in January. They haven't necessarily signed a winger this year, as far as I'm aware. Who did they bring in? I remember, I know they brought in someone. Oh yeah, it was Veltman from Brighton. I don't think they've actually spent any money at West Ham, so this wouldn't be one that breaks the bank for them at £3 million. But yeah, look, interesting one. Reiss Nelson, look, he had that moment against Bournemouth, and the club gave him a £100,000 a week, which I think since that deal was signed, Reese would agree, it probably hasn't worked out. There were comments on his TikTok the other week saying just, mate, give up your wages, give it to new signings, which, he liked the comment, which I think is just really unclassy from Arsenal fans in the first place. But I think this guy's time at Arsenal is probably the right time to move on now. I think it was the right time to move on last year. Um, yeah, I think this is probably a deal that should have been done before the World Cup. He's here on pre-season. He didn't even make the squad for the friendly against Como. Fabio Vieira came on over him on the wing in the game against Dortmund. Yeah, I don't see Reiss Nelson's sort of space within the Arsenal squad now, which is a shame because, as I said, he had that Bournemouth moment. He's been at the club for years. I'm not gonna say what year because I don't know off the top of my head what year he joined Arsenal, but he was here when Wenger was here. He's been here for a long time. He's a boyhood Arsenal fan. He's come through hell end. Yeah, it's sad to see academy players leave, but I do think this is probably the right time for Nelson to go. And I think he'd be a brilliant addition to the Championship side. I think he'd score a lot of goals in that league, and hopefully he can find consistent football and consistent minutes because he's been on two loan spells these last 2 years, and he hasn't found that. I think his time at Fulham was disrupted through injury, and his time at Brentford last year was interrupted purely to the fact that Brentford had such a good year, and their wingers just broke onto the scene. So yeah, unfortunately for Reiss Nelson, I think his time at Arsenal is over. Now, this is a really interesting one. Martín Zubimendi. Obviously, Arsenal have just made the signing of Bruno Guimaraes, who is on the back of this shirt, by the way. Bruno Guimaraes is now a gunner. And loads of Arsenal midfielders now have been rumoured with an exit. Obviously, Norgard's left for Everton. We're going to be talking about Lewis-Skelly in a moment. And Zubimendi, apparently Chelsea are after Zubimendi. I don't see this one happening now that this deadline was set for Enzo Fernandez. It's just rubbish. What's stopping Man City putting in a bid before actual deadline day? Yeah, yeah. If Man City bid an eye-watering amount of money for Enzo Fernandez that Chelsea simply just can't turn down, then I think that would probably ignite interest in our midfielders again. So this is a really interesting one. I think if Enzo Fernandez leaves Chelsea, they could potentially look at Zubimendi as a potential replacement. I don't particularly like Enzo Fernandez, so obviously I'm going to say that this is an upgrade for Chelsea. But at the same time, I don't think Zubimendi's going to leave Arsenal after 1 year. I would be devastated if he leaves after 1 year because I think he had a pretty decent opening season. Um, Pretty decent. He won the title. Yeah, he was a part of a title-winning squad. I think he had a good year in his first year, and with Bruno Guimaraes coming in, I think his minutes will probably reduce. That's only for the good because he played well too many minutes last year. And towards the end of the season, obviously, I think he looked a little bit tired. So it's good that Bruno Guimaraes has come in to reduce the amount of minutes that this guy plays, not necessarily in a bad way, but to help Zubimendi's fitness and longevity for his career at Arsenal, really. Um, but also interested from Spanish clubs as well, for Martin Zubimendi. So it's something to keep an eye on, but I don't think he'll leave. Gabriel Martinelli is a player that I have been saying for 18 months now should probably leave Arsenal. I think this is now the time that he should leave. I think this is the opportunity to get the most money for him because his contract is up in 12 months. So we don't want him going for free. Because I still think this guy, although I don't particularly rate him as much as I did 3, 4 years ago, I still think he's a sellable asset. So I would look to move this guy on while we can. And Galatasaray have had a bid rejected. Well, they've had a bid sent into Arsenal. I don't necessarily think it's been rejected, but apparently Martinelli has no interest in joining Galatasaray. And this is where the odd Osimhen talk comes in, because apparently Osimhen was spoken about going the other way, joining Arsenal. Yeah, I do think that Martinelli is certainly upgradable on, and that's why we're looking at Ndiaye and Yildiz and players like that, to upgrade on Martinelli. And I think if you do get 50 million, something like that, it's a good deal. It's just who would pay for that? Who would pay that? I mean, essentially, clubs in Italy, Galatasaray maybe, but if he has no interest, then what's the point? I don't think Martinelli would be interested in joining Saudi either if he doesn't want to go to Turkey. So I think Martinelli wants to stay, but in the kindest way possible. I think Arsenal might want to move him on. So that's a really difficult situation to manage. We'll see over the next few weeks how the club deal with that. And then, interestingly as well, Ethan Nwaneri was another player that was talked about with that Galatasaray Arsenal sort of meeting. Apparently, Galatasaray hold an interest, but Ethan Nwaneri has impressed Arteta. He's impressed the fans during pre-season. I think he's put in some good performances in this new role that Ethan's been given. You know, we've seen him just as much in a defensive half as we have in the final third, which is really interesting to see because it's something that we're not used to. You know, when he broke out in that sort of breakout season, 24-25, he was scoring all those goals. He was playing as a right winger, the majority of the time in the Premier League, and to see him in sort of like a box to box role, it was quite weird. But yeah, I thought he did it well. I thought he did it well, and that's only going to boost his opportunity of playing. And I really don't want this guy to go. I don't want to sell Nwaneri yet. He signed a new deal 12 months ago, I think. I think he signed a new deal last season. So it would be a shame to see this guy go, but look, I think the opportunity in the squad, obviously the squad's very congested in positions that he does play in. So if he wants to go to seek first team football, then fair enough. But I think that should be a loan to a Premier League club, get Premier League minutes, get Premier League experience for Ethan Nwaneri. But ideally, you keep him, if you can. Now, next, Gabby Jesus. Gabby Jesus. Yes, Napoli want Gabriel Jesus, and Arsenal are setting a pretty high price tag on the Brazilian striker. I don't know if he's got a year left on his deal or if it's 2 years left, but apparently we want 30 million for him, which, considering he hasn't played much over the last few years, he's kind of been a squad player. That's an interesting one. Um, yeah, I don't know if Napoli will pay 30 million for him or whether they'll pay under that. But obviously Lukaku, their current striker, is um potentially heading out to Besiktas. Is it Besiktas? He's definitely on the way out, I think, Lukaku. And Jesus is seen as a Lukaku replacement for Napoli. I think he'd do really well in Italy. I think he'd score a lot of goals. So look, Gabriel Jesus, he's had lots of great moments at Arsenal. If he does decide to leave, then fair enough, to him. And then the final one, if this guy leaves, it would be heartbreaking. Myles Lewis-Skelly, Chelsea and Manchester United have inquired about Myles Lewis-Skelly, about potential availability. I really don't want this guy to go. I think if this guy leaves Arsenal, this would be an absolute disgrace. I think Lewis-Skelly leaving is just as bad as Romero coming in. Obviously, that's not going to happen, and I don't think Lewis-Skelly will leave. But there's lots of potential for Lewis-Skelly to get an opportunity this year. Now that he's broken into the midfield and he's started all of the pre-season games in midfield. I think there is a real opportunity for this guy to get minutes at left back to cover for the left backs. I think there's an opportunity to cover in midfield for Declan Rice and Mendy, Guimaraes. I think next week he should be starting Premier League opener against Coventry. I actually start him and Bruno Guimaraes in a double pivot at the moment. I think that's how the club should line up. Obviously, a lot can change in a week. Declan Rice might be ready to go, so Mendy might be back. Um, then he might go for Marino, but I think this guy should be starting the Premier League opener next week. So yeah, if this guy goes, it's an absolute disgrace. Do I think he'll go though? I'm gonna say no. I don't think Lewis-Skelly will leave Arsenal this summer. So that is all the transfer news. That's my reaction. That's my thoughts on all of the current deals that apparently Arsenal are looking around. What do you guys make of all of the news? Please subscribe if you're new to the channel. Check out more transfer news in the playlist that's currently on your screen. Subscribe with the little button over there. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.